I work with Tagline Consulting. I'm Doug Green on Drupal.org, and I write a magazine article for a regular column in Drupal Watchdog called Drupal Art, and that's kind of what we're going to play with a little bit here. Normally my talk is, normally, when I talk about Coder, I talk about the, coding standards and the details of how your code should look, how you can use the product, and I'm hoping to dovetail into that later on in the presentation. I want to kind of start off with this idea from, my Watchdog magazine article that, and I'll get a slide for that, and we'll get to it in a minute. If you're going to tweet at all, I'm trying to promote the Drupal Art hashtag. Nobody ever uses it, but maybe we can start using it some. This presentation's online with a really ugly bit.ly URL. I wish I'd thought to create a nicer one, but if anybody wants to link to it, it's linked to from the FLDC Florida Drupal Camp page here that we're looking at. So I guess I need to run this in presentation mode, or else it's not going to do this right. This is what it didn't have any animation, I was just going through there. This is what I said I'd talk about, and what I just went through a little bit was really I'm going to be talking more about writing good code, being conscientious as a developer of the choices you make, and all that, and hopefully we'll also have time to talk about some of the new features of Coder. Stella Powers maintained Coder for several years when I took a hiatus, and in Munich I took it over, so the last 6 months we've added some new things. It has better Drush integration, it has a Coder to system. I had a client that wanted to run it anytime anybody did a git check-in, so we kind of built that in, with a single command you can install a git hook, and then Coder will run anytime you check in. But so software is a discipline. Software is a discipline. I'm talking about it as art, but it's also a discipline. Discipline with a capital D, as in a practice, as in a medical practice, a medical discipline. It's something, you think about the discipline of coding standards with a small d, but this is a practice for us. It's my profession. In my profession, I learn things, I try to get better at it, I practice things, I change my style over time, I learn new things. But anybody new to this practice or discipline or profession, you should start by learning the basics. The basics for Drupal is really, and we're not playing the drinking game, is the you should have had a bottle of whiskey when you were doing the drinking game. It's no fun just drinking Diet Coke or whatever.
You can thank the TSA for that.
When I got involved with Drupal, I found these Drupal coding standards, and it was the way I learned how to develop in Drupal, really, to read them. I sometimes feel like a pedantic tyrant harping on spacing, or adding, having your comments formatted properly. There's reasons behind all these things, though, that, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the reasons in this talk, but, just accept that you can become a better programmer by following the practice of other people in this profession. These standards have been discussed, they've been talked about, they've been tried, and some of them seem meaningless. Like, for example, the spacing. The spacing rule might seem meaningless, but part of the reason that we have common spacing is, getting into the aesthetic feel of your code. You can look at a piece of code and it feels good to you. If it's spaced all differently, you're going to look at that and it's just not going to feel good. You're not going to want to touch it. So some of these standards are just so we all, as a community, feel good about working on something. But some of the other standards, there are real reasons for them, such as a lot of the commenting standards are really there so that our automated tools can run properly and create good documentation.
I often think of it as, especially with the spacing, the code formatting, as the visual equivalent of muscle memory. Just like you train all those muscles.
And that fits in very well with maybe my next slide. But let's see. So we're going to start practicing our discipline. I've got a couple quotes, and muscle memory is a good quote. Thomas Edison's credited with saying genius is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. We often think that we do great things because we have a lot of great insight, but a lot of this stuff just takes work. You just keep practicing at it. You massage your code. It fits in with this Malcolm Gladwell quote. Has anybody here read Outliers? It's a great book. He's written several great books, but Outliers talks about what makes people successful. And he posits, and I think he's been he's made it very popular, that it takes 10,000 hours to get proficient, to become an expert at anything. I used to be asked, 5-10 years ago, someone to ask, well, how do you become where you are in your profession? We all maybe mentor people that are getting out of college or just starting college, and they ask, well, how do you become, this person? And I had no answer other than to tell them the full story. Well, you start programming when you're this high, and you go to college for 4 years and you practice. But really, I think the idea that it doesn't take 20 or 30 years to become an expert at something, but you do need to put in your time. And a general rule of thumb, 10,000 hours is a decent rule. So if you've got people that are getting into this profession, there's nothing to discourage, but it does take time and practice, like anything. And I think this fits in with your muscle memory quote. A friend of mine has always shared, repetition strengthens and reinforces habit. Just by doing something over and over and over again, these things become rote, and I start following these things. I mentioned I work with Tag One. I don't know, we have a good reputation in the community, but I work with Charlie, CHX, and Catch, Catch Pool, and a few others, and Jeremy and Marco. Marco wrote taxonomy modules. So I work with a lot of people that have been involved in Drupal for a long time. And I sometimes, I don't know when to break the rules sometimes. I just know that these are good rules to follow. And I'll ask, last week I asked Catch something, and I can't remember the detail, but I review a lot of code in my job, and when I was reviewing this code, I asked him a question. Well, this is a little non-standard. Should we do it this way? And he actually knew why we could break that rule. But for me, it was just that. Well, I know that we really should use Drupal static instead of static, or we really should use form underscore form. The actual form name. Instead of form alter, you would use the specific form alter for that form. These are just patterns that I'm used to following. So repetition, by just doing these things blindly, I think I've become a better programmer because these are tried and true things that I don't make mistakes doing them on a regular basis. So I think I've already covered this slide. This is where I would really kind of move into specifics of coder, but we're going to do something different. Software is an art. Any creative process is an art. I believe that when we think of art and we think of programming or code, you might think, well, let me go through this. I keep getting ahead of myself in the slides. The next slide gets into what I was going to say. It's amazing to me how many people in our community come from artistic backgrounds, and there's a big correlation between music, notes, and mathematics. I mean, that's kind of a known. A lot of people know that, but being a creative person, what we do is I'm trying. Coder and code style and discipline is talking about following rules, and art is about knowing when to break the rules, following them and knowing where you can be creative. And you have to learn about, this is what I was going to go into, you have to learn about brush strokes and colors, and before you can start painting. But once you know those things, maybe you know when you can break those rules. But what we normally think of as art or software art would be the layman's view, and think about we're all professionals, so what we see is the artist's view of it. But the layman's view of it might just be looking at the user experience, and Drupal has a poor reputation on the Drupal experience because we're not really users of our product a lot of times. But where Drupal is really beautiful is under the hood. It's in the APIs, the interfaces, the coding standards, how everything looks nicely, how it's well documented, how we've refactored things nicely, so we build on top of things. And as Ryan was talking this morning about all the abstraction, and that's the view that I always look at. And I was going to put a plug in for this book, which I bought when I was working in London a year and a half ago. And it's just a series of essays on what many famous programmers think of as beautiful code. And one thing you'll get out of that book if you read it, and I've read selective essays in it, I haven't read it cover to cover. But what everybody thinks of as software art, as beautiful code, is different. That's not going right. Let's go forward. So think of your creativity is not just in the user experience you're building. I don't do a lot of front-end work. I do if I have to. I'm not very good at CSS. I can write the JavaScript, but I turn that over to someone else. My job usually is to make sure that my page outputs the right data, and then I let someone else format it. But where I get to express my creativity is in the code. How do I get that data to come out? How do I organize things? What do I name my variables? Do I use classes? Do I put stuff in a different .include file? Do I use good practices that allow things to be cached properly? Do I follow all these standards? That's where I get to express my creativity. Succinct function names and variable names. I'm working on a project right now where a previous developer named an entire system eligibility something. And it's like, I don't know how many times I've misspelled eligibility. You want your variable names to be important and your function names to be meaningful, but also consider, I could have called this valid or something. That's just one small example of using succinct names that are meaningful. We don't have I don't know if I need to say any more about that on the slide, nice comments. We have an API bot that anybody can run on their systems. You can run it on your custom code. You can set it up so that your IRC channel hooks into that, and all you type in is, my function, ? And you get the full API docs for a function that you wrote on your custom project. But all that only really works if you followed some of these standards. I love it when I'm able to set all that up and I'm able to use all that, and that's when proper commenting comes in, that you have doxygen comments in your code, that you have function header comments that use the param and return properly. I'll say about spelling and grammar. We have an international community, and it's very, I sometimes cannot communicate with someone verbally because I don't understand them. I remember when I was first working with, had an Italian client. My project manager was from London. I was working with another person from New Zealand, and we get on a conference call. And I'm not very good at accents, but I would get on IRC and we could communicate. And English is the universal language that we use, and we use it in our code. And if you write, we can communicate a lot better using the written language, in IRC in our code, and just try to. Enough said. I mentioned a little bit that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. What you think is beautiful, I won't. When I'm reviewing code, I'm cautious of knowing what the community has decided is a standard and what I've decided is my standard. I think that art is appreciated. I've been watching. I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I'm watching American Idol this year. I've never watched the show before. The singing music competition. I'm really kind of enjoying it this year, but I am not a musician. I'm a layman that enjoys the music, but what I'm perceiving is the difference between what I judge as good and what the professional judges judge as good. And there's a difference. I sometimes like the popular, people over singing loud, looking good, and then the judges who know, the mechanics of that, art will say something differently. But I think good art is appreciated by both the layman, myself, and someone that's professional that can create this type of art, and that's true of coding as well. I work on another project in another language with a partner of mine who doesn't program, but we do a lot of peer programming. He knows the business aspect of it, and we've commented back and forth several times that he's the layman in programming, and I would be, the artist or the expert in programming. But he comments about how the formatting of my code just makes it aesthetically pleasing to him. Without knowing what the variable names do or any of that, just the way it's formatted, makes it look good to him. I think good art evokes an emotional response, and it transcends time and place. And we're going to get into an odd slide here now, and we're going to discuss a little bit about what is beautiful. And I somehow went forward. Oh, I can't make that bigger. Van Gogh, a painting, one of my favorite artists. I don't know how to paint. I don't know why that is beautiful to me. It may not be beautiful to you, but I can appreciate that there's something in this painting that a lot of people appreciate. It's not just me. You may find that you don't like it, but what's beautiful about that? Is it that it's kind of distorted perspective, or another great painting? I think this is Renoir's Boating Party. Very detailed, very different than the first painting, darker colors. But what I've always liked about this painting is that it has so many different scenes and vignettes in it. Again, I'm trying to, get you to think a little bit about what makes something beautiful, and we're going to take this metaphor from traditional art to art craft. Art isn't just paintings. I mean, architecture, buildings, structures, the Eiffel Tower. If you go to Paris and you stand right next to the Eiffel Tower, I don't know if there's anything that I look at it and say, wow, when you're standing 10 feet away from it, and you don't think, wow, that's a beautiful piece of art. The real appreciation of the Eiffel Tower is the history and the perspective, and that you can see it. It's in the north. I think it's the northwest part of Paris. You can see it from a lot of the city. I wish I had blown that out. Casa Bastillo, that's what it was. This is in Barcelona. Was anybody here for the first chance of the book? Was anybody in Barcelona DrupalCon? No, you weren't.
Not at all.
I was Drush.
I was Russian.
You know, yeah, I got to go to DrupalCon Paris and DrupalCon Barcelona. This architecture, this architect who lived around the early 1900s. I don't know if anybody saw the 60 Minutes thing in the last 6 months about the church that was built in Barcelona that was just inaugurated. From Gaudi designed it. He designed this house, and what's really interesting about this house is, you know, everything in it is curved. You know, and you know, you think about architecture. I was reading Steve Jobs' autobiography, and when he was designing, or you know, getting them to design the iPhone, he wanted curved corners. You know, and curved corners, and you know, and we do a lot of curved corners in our visual, you know, experience of our website. But there's something pleasing about curved corners. This house looks like an underwater paradise. I mean, everything in it is wavy and curved, and you know, not square corners like you would think. You probably don't think my niece here is very beautiful. You know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You know, but it evokes an emotional response to me. I mean, you know, for me, that's beautiful. Now, I recognize that it's not beautiful for you. You know, maybe if I had, you know, this evokes an emotional response, and you know, it's a nude picture, nude painting showing hairy armpits. I mean, I kind of like that style. That's, you know, to me, I know it's not everybody's, but you know, it's enough people's that it's hanging in a museum, and there's something about it. It's not just that, you know, the painting is you know, the brush strokes and the colors maybe aren't. It's the subject here, you know, that we're working with. And is the picture beautiful, or the picture of orchids, or is it that, you know, the or are the orchids? Anyways, there's enough. The other thing I wanted to kind of go through on beautiful here is, you know, and I've got a slide here where I'm going to summarize some of it, but maybe it's the collage. You know, when I was first putting this slide together, you know, I had to like arrange these things so that we had equal spacing everywhere. You know, when I had this one smaller, it didn't look as good to me, and I couldn't fill this space perfectly. You know, where do you position this? Do you position it down here? You know, there's a lot of things in making something beautiful. You know, and just what do I learn from art? You know, that I can now apply. You know, as, you know, to what we do. You know, the organization of things is important. You know, the way that I organized those slides was important. I probably should have had all these come up at once instead of having. So what I really want to try to, you know, get you to do is, you know, think about your craft, that you're an artist, that, you know, we do have some rules that we want to follow, but be creative where you can be creative. Let's get into some code. And how am I doing on time? Probably okay. Wow, 20 minutes. I use this example in one of the magazine articles. Just looking at this, you know, we run into lots of code that's poorly formatted. You know, it's a little bit nicer when it's formatted, you know, uniformly. As a third example, I showed this to someone yesterday, and he questioned, do I really like it that way? Because I do, and he didn't. And this is where we might get into personal preference. But rather than 3 lines of code, I much prefer to do it in 1. And I have to be a little cautious, and I know in my personal style, you know, I get overly, lines of code are not as important in PHP, especially with an opcode cache as it it used to be in compiled languages. And then as a final example, I and J aren't very good variable names. If you knew what the heck these things were, it would be a lot more beautiful to me to go from this example here to this example here. And sadly enough, I run into a lot of examples like the first one.
I and J, unbelievable.
Var 1, Var 2, Var 3.
They're common iterator.
Might as well do I and L.
So a Drupal coding standard, and this one I pulled out of Drupal 7 core. I was using Node module as an example, and we're going to see it a little bit later on when we look at some coder stuff. But an unremarkable function out of Node module, we tend to look to core as the example of ways to do things. But I want to show that this is good, but it's not really perfect. It's not really, things in core are good, but they're not right. I mean, we've got a nice doxygen comment. That first line's supposed to be just a single line for our summary comments. There's actually several poor examples where that's not done properly, but it's a nice comment. We're supposed to have an extra blank line in here, but it's not. Again, I just look at it, and it's not that I think that it's ugly or not ugly, but I know that we have these things in there for a reason, for our API docs to work right, and when they're not there, it becomes ugly to me because I know that it's a little broken. Good use of Drupal static. We switched to that function in Drupal 7 off of using static. The reason we use this function Drupal static is so that it's a lot easier to programmatically clear your static variables with a single call from another function. A good variable name, I like the use of the name $cache for these things. They use mnemonics here, which are good. I didn't point an arrow, but mark read, mark new, mark updated, mark read are all nice. Okay, now for the book. What am I going to show next that I don't like?
Functions without comments?
What is that?
Functions without comments?
No.
The else if.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a partial answer. Who said else if?
The spacing of the whole if block.
Well, first of all, I mean, you'd be using ifs instead of case switch. That's something I would notice right away. And then the else is.
The else if. The other thing here is we use timestamp greater than new limit in both these conditions. So you're doing you're executing that twice. So the else if gets the book. Hand that back. But I wanted to highlight this whole block of code I would have rewritten. And if it was able to use the, Forrest, do you know the name of that when you did the question mark colon? There's a name to that construct.
Yeah, the ternary. Oh, it's the ternary, right?
It's called the ternary.
Yeah, this is the
Ternary.
ternary operator.
Yeah, if you could have done a ternary here, I would have, but I actually don't think you can. And I end up with this block of code instead, which is doing the conditional once and then doing each of these conditions, but not doing the else if. Again, I think some of that is personal style. I don't think we have anything that says don't do the else if you don't have to.
Probably get Andrew Riley to confirm this, but I understand that both the switch and the ternary operator in PHP are less performant than the if operator.
It's possible they
That's what I'm
are.
told from Andrew, who is very knowledgeable in these things.
Chicks did a session several years ago called PHP WTF.
Yeah.
And some of these performance things, I've had these arguments with him. I prefer a single quoted string over a double quoted string because in a double quoted string it has to process the variables inside it. Well, if you run that 1,000,000 times, you save a nanosecond, some of these performance things just aren't worth it.
Right.
You know, and readability is important, and we count on an output cache.
You can actually go down some, get yourself painted with some performance, go down some performance roads and get in the corner with scalability. You know, like this amazing little all this stuff is optimized for performance all over your code, and then you try to scale it and you're in a world of hurt.
What was it, Newt, that said caching is the root of all evil, or somebody, you know, some famous programmer, the caching is the root of all evil. Premature optimization.
Is the,
Yeah, that's what it was, premature optimization.
And then someone applied that to caching.
Yeah, I'm thinking Donald Knuth said it, but I could be wrong. So, just in summary of what I've been going through here, we have a professional practice, professional discipline. We should learn our discipline well. The discipline teaches us good practice, but also we should learn to go beyond, you know, what we initially learn and understand where we should be creative and ingenious, put our own, make it better. And I guess the final, you know, thing is that hopefully I'm convincing you to pay a little bit more detail to what you're writing. You know, and that's going to segue now into the coder talk and work, and I'm doing fine on time. I already gave away my book, so there's no more to ask. Should I ask, does anybody here not know what coder is? Okay. You haven't heard, okay. The coder, like I said, I got involved in Drupal in 2006. At that time, we had these coding standards. Well, we have these coding standards now. We had a code-style.php or maybe it was a Perl script, I'm thinking, in the repository in Drupal 4.6 or 4.7 that you could run on your code to see, you know, if it matched certain standards. But I was in an engineering meeting at my company, and we were talking about doing code reviews. And you know, if you work with other people, and hopefully, even if you're an independent, you can find a peer to work with. You know, I find doing code reviews very, very helpful. You know, even if it's just reviewing my own code, I always commit my code, make a pull request, and look at it on GitHub before I ask anybody else to actually look at it. You know, when I'm talking about client sites, I always review my own diff before asking someone else to look at it. But code reviews are very helpful. So we're having this conversation at an engineering meeting, and I say, well, we don't need to do code reviews because I can tell you what he does wrong every time, you know? And, you know, because, you know, this one programmer made the same mistakes over and over and over again. And a lot of these things are just simple, you know, things. So we wrote a program to do it, and I really built it so I could learn the coding standards. Unfortunate, I've had this conversation a little bit right now. Coder is not as well maintained as a lot of other Drupal projects. Partially because I'm not much of a user of it anymore. I think early on I was a big user of it, and it helped me with my programming to learn how to do these things better. But since I don't use it right now, but anyways, I built it for me, and then I built it for others. I think I used to talk a lot more about what it does do. Coder runs off of a rules-based system. It's really just an engine to look at code. It's a static code analysis tool. It originally mainly used reg expressions to look for rules, so to look for, you know, things in your code. So we would write a review that this is where Ryan is right. We overcomplicate things because we try to make them abstract. A review is a set of rules, and each rule can check for different things, and it can check for different things using different mechanisms. And most of the the rule types are regular expressions. What it does is it's a static code analysis tool that reviews your code using a set of static rules that are written. The rules are pluggable and can be enhanced at any time. Coder has a bunch of rules built into it that try to emulate the coding standards as best we can. Other people have written additional reviews that you can download as extension modules, such as the Coder Tough Love module. And that's how it works. In the last 6 months, Clausy, more than 6 months ago, PHP Code Sniffer started to get heavy use in Drupal. Again, going back to history and where we are, and how we got to here, is when we first built Coder, we were on PHP 4. PHP 4 didn't have the get token function. The get token function basically parses the PHP for you, so we couldn't really do real parsing. So Coder has gotten somewhat of a bad name at times because it had a lot of false positives, and it had false positives because it was basing itself mostly on these regular expressions. Fast forward to 6 months ago, or even a couple of years ago, PHP Code Sniffer, with PHP 5 became something that we could start using. We merged the PHP Code Sniffer project with Coder. It's now distributed in Coder, and we're able to write much better rules now. You don't necessarily get those rules by default. You have to add a flag when you're using a Drush, but we're going to go through that. If you run Drupal core through PHP Code Sniffer, I think I had 500 errors. I mean, it's just very pedantic, and I used to always say that you're smarter than this tool, and even if if the tool tells you that there's a warning here, it's really just something for you to look at. Hopefully you can diagnose and figure out that either you're right or the tool is right. But just because Coder gives you a warning doesn't mean you have to fix something. Coder also started from its infancy to be used to help us upgrade our modules. We could, just like you could write rules to look for certain, regular expressions for coding standards, you could write rules that look for certain regular expressions that we knew had to be upgraded from one major version of Drupal to another major version of Drupal. We have upgrade reviews that are fairly good. The Drupal 6 upgrade review was pretty good. The Drupal 7 upgrade review was pretty good. We have not written a Drupal 8 upgrade review yet, and I have a slide at the end where I'm going to say it probably won't get done unless somebody in the community steps up and volunteers to push me and help me and take the lead on it. We've added Drush and Git integration and this ignore system. Why the ignore system is important is if we're going to use this as a tool, say on Drupal.org before a patch, just like we have the testing system, we could use this system on D.O to test code standards, but we do know that there are false positives, and if there are false positives, you as an author should be able to go in and put something in the code to say ignore this false positive. The same thing goes if you're going to use it as a Git commit hook. You certainly want to tell it to ignore this so that every time you check in the code, you don't have to override it. So how do we use? I only use Coder from Drush these days, and I had a recent issue where somebody was complaining that, well, I must have a terrible module if I have to download another module to use it. I don't know what this person uses, but
You must, if you have to download a module to use another module.
he was complaining.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. And certainly as a developer tool, and I hope we've established we're all developers here. Drush, it was the book I chose that I thought this group would appreciate most. That I've always been a command line guy. So hopefully you're comfortable with Drush. Drush, Coder now works as a Drush plugin. You don't have to install it as a module on your site. You can install it as a Drush plugin. There is a problem that it can't be a plugin and a module on your site. It can't be both right now. We need to fix that. But if you happen to do both, you're going to get lots of errors about duplicate functions already being defined. But you can just CD to your utility Drush directory and download Coder. I've tried to create, and again, there's another issue out there, and if there's any Windows developer that wants to assist, this works on my machine, but I think there are some problems if you don't have pair installed in yours. Since we were talking about the GPL earlier today, we can't actually distribute a third party on D.O, so you have to go out and get it. So we wrote a little, a Drush command to go ahead and install PHP code sniffer for you. But like I said, it uses pair, it works fine on Mac OS and Linux. I think even some Windows that have pair it can work on, but if you don't have pair, you're SOL.
Just to know that I've assumed everyone caught, there's a minor typo that I've assumed everyone caught.
And Drush install PHP code sniffer. What's my typo?
It's not. Oh, you do. It's install PHP code sniffer as one.
Yeah.
Okay, so otherwise you would just assume you can't parse it and it assumes it's a Drupal module. It's interesting. So it's a hard-coded install function. Interesting.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Is there a Drush install space something?
It seems like there should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't. You're probably right. There is no. This is a custom command that I wrote.
I see. Because it seems like there should be a Drush install, and that way we can start finding ways to.
No, this is the right command. If you do -H on at the end of any Drush command, it will give you the Drush help on that command. So if you just want to see all the help on Coder, just Drush coders -H. I probably have too many switches. I probably needs a better, some cleanup. I did some cleanup in the last 6 months. That's a command that I use all the time. The --all tells it to run all of its reviews. The --minor tells you to give us all the results. There's minor warnings, major warnings, and critical warnings. Generally I'm interested in all the warnings, so I tell it to start at the minor. Without that, you miss some of the warnings. The empty equals 0 or empty equals no just tells it to don't tell me about files that don't have any problems. And then, your module, and it will check everything for your module. That didn't parse very well, but that's --ignore name, all one word. Probably, again, not the best key, but I'll show you the output. The ignore name is important, that you need to see the names of some of these warnings so you know how to ignore them in the future. And if you want to get code sniffer results and you really, really want to see a lot of things, you can do that. You can also get PHP code sniffer by just running the PHP CS command line option, and it formats it the way PHP code sniffer does by default. This formats it the way Coder would normally format it. And lastly, if you want to install anything as a Git hook, it'll take all your arguments in here and make those the default arguments it will run on any check-in. And all this does is it modifies your tilde Git, whatever that is, I don't remember, somewhere in there. So this is too small to see, and I probably can't. It's even smaller. How do I end this? Okay, we're stuck with it. It's just the output of how the Drush coder looks like. The module name, the line number. This name here is the ignore name that you would use. You only get that if you use the --ignore name option. I probably should make that a default so it's not, this was run on Drupal 7's node module. You wouldn't expect to see many errors. You might expect to see no errors, but there's some. I don't know if these are real errors or if they're coder errors, false positives. It's possible that we've messed up, but the spacing a lot of times, there is some funny formatting that some programmers do. That if you say, if you call a function with a list of arguments, and your list of arguments you've got 50 arguments, a lot of times you do paren argument 1 comma and then argument 2 comma and argument 3 comma, and you format that at the level of the parenthesis. I don't think Drupal actually has a strong standard on this, and if you did that, it's possible that you would get false positives. I think the general way to do it is still to indent your second argument 2 spaces over, but it's not a strong standard. Coder probably has a false positive on that. But these are, this is probably a real error. Somebody put extra spaces at the end of their line. Extra spaces at the end of the line are not life-threatening unless, of course, they're after the closing PHP at the end of the file that we've decided not to use because we know it's life-threatening. Did I say that too quickly?
I just have a question about integrating Coder into an automated workflow, because it seems to be when you have a team of developers that may or not have all kind of agree on using Coder or even agree on this, the value of the standards. The easier thing to explain is, well, false positives are a lot better than false negatives. So-called false negatives, right? False positives are, that's fine. But the way they do present a problem is not so much the persuading people that it's valuable as integrating it into the fully automated solution. Because if you're trying to have a fully automated build process and you want to use code or code sniffer as part of that, false positives are going to break builds every time for no good reason. So this is a problem which I'm wondering how we can solve.
I think Code Sniffer I think we have much fewer false positives than we know about. Let me go 2 slides ahead and I'll show you the ignore system.
That's probably exactly what I'm asking about.
I've used this as drush git commit hooks, which means that we catch the errors before they get committed, to the code base, or even to your private branch. They catch them on your client, beforehand. Or I've actually used it in a Jenkins build process that looks at the Git pull requests and catches them that way. So this was the output without Sniffer, and this is the output of Sniffer. And a problem here, I guess, is I think this is using the more current coding standards, and this is running it on Drupal 7, which hasn't been upgraded for a lot of those coding standards. So things like this, missing parameter type at position 2, it's in a comment. It's talking about the @param, so you might say @param $type. But what you're supposed to say now is @param string $type. So it's missing, the type. So looking through this, running it, about 3/4 of them are that one problem. Another problem that we weren't very consistent on is lines that are too long. I violate that all the time. I use an editor. I use 3 monitors. I don't care. That it's 80 characters, but if we're gonna, so that's the output you can get with that. And I'm already over, sorry. The coder ignore system. This issue is where we implemented it. What you do is you put a comment above your code to tell it to ignore that. You can tell it to ignore a particular rule in an entire function. You can tell it to ignore a rule in an entire file. I left that out. You can say, ignore rule name : file, and it will ignore it in the entire file. You can tell it to ignore it in a class. You can tell it to just ignore it on the next line, which is what this first thing does. You can tell it to ignore it for the next 10 lines if you want. So basically, it's lint. I should have saved a book for this. Lint. Anybody know lint? You know, it's Lint style comments, you know, to tell it to ignore things. And if anybody is motivated and interested in helping, like I said, I don't do a lot of work on it right now. I did take it back over about 6 months ago. I added, you know, a lot of this Drush, Git, PHP code sniffer stuff. I think we're closer to being able to use it as an automated tool, but it's not being run on D.O yet. It probably could be. I think it's mature enough along. But we also don't have any 7x to 8x upgrade reviews written yet. And if you want to help the community out, the community has used those in the past to help upgrade modules. And it helps if you understand regular expressions, if you're going to help. And that's my presentation. Sorry for going a few minutes over.